That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441.
Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly podcast of the Free Speech Union. I'm Jan McVarish, and with me again this week is Connie Shaw. Hi, Connie.
Hello, Jan.
Hi. I know you've been doing quite a few media appearances this week on the stories we're about to work through. So we're going to talk about two things. First of all, the new guidance that's come out from the Office for Students, and then we'll move on to some discussion around the free speech implications of what's coming out from the grooming gangs initial inquiry. And then some other kind of related issues around the freedom to criticise religion from that. So first of all, the Office for Students, so Arif Ahmed, who lots of people will be familiar with, who is the director of the Office for Students, after a long, probably very frustrating pause, they've finally been able to put out their guidance on academic freedom and freedom of speech on campus, which is really encouraging. And it's so clear. So this relates to the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, and it's basically guidance which shows how universities ought to interpret that. So if people can go to the website of the officeforstudents.org.uk and have a look for themselves, and I think people will be impressed by just how clear it is. So I'm just looking at the very first page of it, and the first statement is, why does free speech matter? And it's, what do we mean by free speech? It's incredibly clear. And so what it says we mean by free speech is, it says the Office for Students stands for the widest possible definition of freedom of speech, anything within the law. Free speech includes written materials and other forms of expression. It is not limited to the spoken word. Freedom of speech within the law is protected. Unlawful speech is not protected. So it's just brilliant. There's no talk about psychological safety, emotional harm, harassment, offence. It's cleared away so much of the rubbish that people have assumed have been the rules that have governed university life for the last God knows how long. And it's just a very, very clear statement, and it's got sections to guide all different sectors of the university. So really clear, really, really clear. So the main things that it does is to set in place a 3-step framework for approaching the free speech issue on campus. So first of all, it says that administrators and others involved in making these decisions have to assess whether speech is lawful. So very, very clear, really. Well, obviously it will become complicated when it hits up against interpretations of the law, but initially it should be fairly clear what is and what is not lawful. Secondly, they have to ask, are reasonably practicable steps that the university can take to secure it being made? And that includes things like what they call negative steps, which means removing restrictive policies, which might be about the safety and emotional well-being of people on campus. It also says that they should make sure that they're being careful to not investigate frivolous complaints. Now, this is something a lot of people are very familiar with, where people just fire off a complaint, and people have been invited by universities very often to make complaints, and it's been made very, very easy to do so. And that's, the universities often say, we are obliged to investigate every complaint. This says, no, you're not. You're able to assess whether they're reasonable or frivolous or not. And then thirdly, just the presumption should be that you should allow speech to proceed, by which is particularly talking about events then. And then finally, the universities have to give credence to the Article 10 rights. And so that's the kind of ultimate test, really, as to whether they're being infringed by any sort of steps they might be trying to make. And they're told very clearly that saying that the university's reputation is at risk as a reason to suppress speech is not a valid reason to suppress speech. That's extraordinary, because that's come up in so many cases. That the institution's values The idea that the values of the institution are going to be infringed somehow by a speaker or by what a lecturer is saying, that's not valid. And offensiveness is not a valid reason to not allow speech on campus. So I think it's probably important to grasp just how different this is to the way universities have been operating and how people think universities have been operating for the last quite long period of time now. So it kind of disembeds lots of the crap that people have been working to for the long period of time now.
I think there will be some universities, well, especially sort of the higher up staff, and people come to mind, such as Sasha Rose-Neal, the Vice Chancellor of Sussex University, who will not be very happy with the guidance. Because after, when Sussex was fined by the Office for Students back in, was it in February?
Yeah, a couple of months ago, I think.
Yeah. And Sasha Rose-Neal was doing the media rounds. Obviously, Sussex was fined, I think it was £585,000 because their policies, specifically around sex and gender issues, created a chilling, a stifling effect, I think the words were, that the Office for Students said. And because they had been suppressing free speech, and obviously there was the investigation due to sort of Kathleen Stock's case being at the centre of this, they got fined such a large amount of money. And apparently it could have been up to 3 million, but so they actually got quite a big discount from what it could have been. But Sasha Rose-Neal who is the Vice Chancellor, was doing the media rounds the next day, saying that this is ridiculous because we can't look after sort of minority students. And she even said on Times Radio, but this means that now we can only regulate illegal speech. So she said on national radio that she wants to be able to regulate the legal speech of students on campus, which does mean, and this is why people say that you have less freedom of speech when you step onto a university campus than when you're not on a campus, which obviously, if there is anywhere where freedom of speech should be absolute to the most extent, obviously it's not completely absolute, because we have there is, for example, incitement to violence. There are things, like it says, sort of within the law, there is speech outside of the law that would be illegal, but the fact that universities have been regulating legal speech, and hearing a Vice Chancellor express her desire to want to continue to do that after being fined, like, because they're challenging it as well. So I wonder now whether they'll just think, God, well, what are we challenging here? Because the Office for Students have come out with this guidance which explicitly says that universities cannot be regulating legal speech, and that's what the Sussex's challenge will be, when they try to I guess they want to appeal it. So I wonder what effects it's going to have on that.
Yeah, so this is, even though it's called guidance, it's legally binding.
Yeah.
So it's and it comes into force on August the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
The clarity is just really, really welcome. And I was thinking about the ways in which it would work. I mean, this isn't going to apply to students at the moment, apart from perhaps in some very limited ways. But nevertheless, I think if students and academics really run with this and make it their own, I think it could have a really good impact. Because I think the problem is that a lot of people on campus will be cynical, resentful, and will kind of try to poo-poo this, although there's a limit to how much they can do that given that it's legally binding. But I think if those academics and students who really do care about free speech and have been worried about speaking out and defending it and exercising it up until now, really make use of this guidance and its clarity, I think there could be something really great, and it could be turned into something really positive on campus. So people say, well, we're going to make sure everybody knows about this. The code of practice has got to be put up in prominent places around campus. So I think what the worst thing is if it just becomes like a bureaucratic stamp that people don't have any faith in. So somehow it needs to be brought to life, I think, by the people who really have got a real stake in it on campus. But then I think it could be really, really good.
That's why I don't know whether this will be mandatory, but Arif Ahmed said that he would encourage university. I'm not sure. I don't know whether he was just encouraging it or was saying that university should be not just encouraging, but saying that this is something that universities kind of must be doing. So inductions to practice, so that students can practice being shocked by opinions, sort of when they go back into university at the start of the semester, which I just think would be brilliant. But I think good luck to the lecturers who are having to do that, because they could then face, I mean the other thing, and I guess this is really good sort of proactive, it's needed but also proactive in this sense, because I was going to say good luck to these lecturers, but the other part of the guidance which protects students and staff is the guidance on parlons, and that if there's a public campaign against a member of staff or a student, the university is expected to publicly reject that campaign and affirm the student or the staff's right to freedom of speech. So, but that's all. It will be interesting to see how it's almost enforced, because it's all good saying it, but will there be punishments for students who create these public campaigns? Because Kathleen Stock, the police told her to not go back on campus because of for her safety. She had to do lectures from home. I know other Philip. I can never remember how to say his last name properly.
Oh, Kaisley.
Philip Kaisley.
From New Culture Forum.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, the campaign against him, it was pretty extreme. And I know that he was obviously concerned for his safety as well. So you might be able to sort of, unless you're going to be punishing these students.
I think sometimes, though, so a couple of examples, right, of I think Kathleen Stock's case was, clearly it was the most extreme I've seen. But then other people are kind of trading on almost the threat that was established there, even if they won't actually enact it. So, for example, we were supporting an academic at Cardiff who set up a academic freedom society that's independent of us, but he set it up for academics and students. And first of all, the society, the university refuses to accept that it is an internal staff society. So they're saying it's an external society, which means that when the academic tries to organise events, he gets charged for using rooms on campus. And so when he did his launch event, which was a very low-key affair, he had some really good speakers, a very balanced panel. The university charged for the room. They then decided that they needed security. And this has happened again. So just a couple of weeks ago, there was a second event. This is a year apart almost. And with a panel of speakers speaking about academic freedom, again, a really balanced panel. But one of them was Eric Kaufman, who a lot of people will know. And another, and a local activist group, I'm not even sure they were students, decided that Eric Kaufman is a Zionist and therefore shouldn't be allowed on campus. The debate was not about Israel or Gaza, and even if it was, he obviously should be able to speak on campus. They threatened a protest. Even though on the panel there was also a very strongly pro-Palestinian academic, as well as two others. The room hire fee was already being paid. A basic level of security was also required. And then on the day, it was decided that there was going to be an obstruction of the entrance to the building. So therefore 10 security guards would need to be employed at vast expense. Even though nobody really believed that this would actually happen. But there's this kind of game that goes on. So then the poor person organising the meeting has to have contingency plans in place, alternative venues. It's just a massive hassle. You've got speakers travelling to you, and you don't even know whether they're going to be able to get in the building. You think they probably will be able to, but at the same time, the game is that this will be impossible. And all this is because of some threats made, often on social media, that have been picked up by the university who are monitoring this kind of stuff. That meeting went off without incident, except for one student who came into the room and actually apparently asked a very reasonable question before later on storming out saying free Palestine. And then some other young people, whether they were students, I don't know, kind of harangued one of the speakers as they all walked off for a drink. But it was a kind of conversation, and it was possible to deal with it. But meanwhile, these 10 security guards were standing around like lemons at vast expense. So that's one example of where it goes badly wrong, and this needs to be solved. And it definitely has a chilling effect unless you've got extraordinary academics who are prepared to just keep on pushing, and to be frank, with our support. But last week we partnered up on an event at Dundee University, which has got in a massive crisis at the moment. But luckily, somebody on our advisory council in Scotland is an academic there, Penny Lewis, and she invited us to hold an event on campus. We had a really good panel. As soon as she put in the necessary forms, for permission to have a room, the Students' Union and one of the staff networks decided to complain and said they shouldn't be allowed to go ahead. I think they objected to Toby being on the panel and Joanna Cherry, former MP. And so then it becomes this, I think they might protest. And we didn't pay for security in this case, but we had to keep monitoring it. I had to organise an alternative venue. And when we got there, it's just a packed room of very, very interested people. Lots of them were Free Speech Union members. It's the first time we'd been to Dundee. A hand sprinkling of students, quite a few academics. 4 police officers turned up and were patrolling around. And I mean, very nice. But
Did you ask for the police to be there?
No. The university alerted the police, and then we were liaising with the police just to find out whether they knew whether anything was going to go on. They'd not heard anything other than from the university. But then on the night we had patrol cars going around, and at one point, it was really funny. I came out of the building just to see if anything was going on, and I saw a group of people just across the road, and I thought, oh God, there is a protest, because there was a bunch of women standing there. And then I realised it was all the TERFs gathering around Maya Forstater taking selfies. So I thought it was, I just thought, oh no, God, there actually is a protest. But anyway, there wasn't. So they were taking pictures of themselves with the police in the background before they came into the event. Anyway, it was very funny, and it was a proper ding-dong of an event. Massive row between Joe Cherry and Jim Allen on our panel. It was about human rights and free speech, but brilliant. And what happened afterwards is that people just came out saying that's what should be happening on campus. And the academics were saying I'd forgotten what it was like, that this should absolutely be what's happening. So, but luckily the university stood firm in that case. And Penny was very confident that they would stand firm and make sure it went ahead. So that's the difference it can make, just the kind of top-down acceptance that free speech has to happen on campus.
Dundee, after the Supreme Court ruling, Dundee's Student Association, which I think it's called rather than Student Union, but it's the same thing. So lots of universities put out statements afterwards addressing the Supreme Court ruling. Lots of them were awful, but Dundee's was particularly awful because the Student Union said, obviously the same as nearly every university, reaffirming their commitment to trans students and their inclusion of them, not addressing sort of women or young women at their university who may want their rights. It was all very one-sided, but also they encouraged students to join a protest against the ruling. That was what the Student Association was saying. But I wasn't surprised to hear that there was a potential protest on the event happening, from what I had already heard.
But then, was there really? I mean, that's what I mean, is you can kind of throw the threat out, and what then kicks into gear is usually this incredibly precautionary approach. And that's all you have to do. All you have to do is suggest that there might be protests because it's contentious. And then that's it. The ball starts rolling, and you've already thrown numerous obstacles in the way of people who otherwise can't risk bringing speakers up if they think they won't be able to get in the building, or it might be cancelled. We didn't know if the university would decide to cancel it right up until the day. And, you spend money on train fares and airfares, and, it's a major chilling effect. So it does. And of course, what you always find is once you're actually at these events, the staff who are managing the buildings are just always really reasonable, rolling their eyes. I mean, last time I was at Cardiff for the launch event of the Academic Freedom Society, there's 10 security guards. Some of them came into the room and were just listening really intently. And one of them was saying, oh, that's really interesting. What on earth was all the fuss about? And they're just rolling their eyes because these are people that are used to, they hear different ideas and opinions all the time. And like, as you say, you go into the local pub and just in your family, you can have all different opinions and arguments. And then you go on campus and suddenly cotton wool comes down and dampens it all down. Well, anyway, there's it's reasons for optimism, albeit obviously there have been this watering down of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act overall, but just shows if you have clarity in the form of Arif Ahmed, I think, and it's that sense of kind of mission really and the importance of free speech, then things can hopefully start to tilt the other way. So all good. Okay, so the next thing we were going to talk about was some obviously very, very important issues around ways in which speech, the freedom of speech, has kind of become a real crunch issue around the issue of grooming gangs, but also this definition of Islamophobia that's kind of brewing that the government wants to push forward. So you were going to take us through at this.
Yes, so as I'm sure lots of people will be aware, on Monday, well, the news came through on Saturday evening, and then on the Monday, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, made the announcement because about launching the national inquiry into the grooming gangs following obviously 6 months of pressure, but also the publication of the Casey audit. And obviously it's a massive U-turn for the government, and we know that back in January, the Prime Minister said that politicians who were calling for a national inquiry were jumping on a far-right bandwagon, and people historically have been labelled or smeared as racist or Islamophobic for bringing up certain aspects of the issue, such as the ethnicity or the religion of the perpetrators, including Andrew Norfolk from the Times, late Andrew Norfolk, who did so much in the early 2000s to start talking about this issue. And just in 2023, Suella Braverman getting in trouble with Ipsos after she said that there was a disproportionate amount of Pakistani Muslim men committing these crimes. And Ipsos said that that was basically inaccurate, and the Daily Mail took it out of the article. And now she's been vindicated because in the Casey report, it says that, well, firstly, it says that the truth has been shied away from, that there's one whole chapter called Denial, and that also false data has been used, or flawed data has been used to dismiss claims. So they don't have enough of the data, but the data that they do have does very clearly point towards the fact that there is a disproportionate amount of Pakistani Muslim men, or in the report where they point to Asian as an ethnicity. And so that's why the grooming gang case as an issue is a free speech issue, because people have been silenced and told that you can't say that, and getting in trouble with actual regulating bodies that regulate the press. And all of a sudden now it's like, well, these people are vindicated. And Suella Braverman said she's not going to challenge it. She wants Ipsos to apologise to the victims for saying that. But anyway, so that's why the grooming gangs as an issue, it is cause for concern within the free speech issue as well. But on the same day that the Casey report was published, on the Monday, the government also issued a call for evidence so that the working group that was set up by Angela Rayner in February this year could have the evidence so that they can establish a non-statutory definition of Islamophobia. And the history with this is that in 2018, there was a All-Party Parliamentary Group, or an APPG, that was set up in order to do the same thing. And the definition that came was as a result of that working group in 2018 was that Islamophobia, or part of the definition said that Islamophobia was rooted in racism. And so in that sense, conflating religion or a set of beliefs with race, because anti-Muslim hatred is already illegal. It's a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. You can't discriminate against someone for being a Muslim. But that definition was highly problematic because it meant that criticism of Islam, specifically of practices, of even perceived Muslimness, so even if the supposed victim of the Islamophobia isn't actually a Muslim, but they're perceived to be, that could still count as being Islamophobic. It was a definition which, as I said, conflates Islam with race, which is clearly... You can't be in a position where by criticising a religion, you're effectively told that you're also a racist. and it gives sort of an extra protection. There's no other religion that has this sort of non-statutory definition that the state is trying to come up with. And even Lord Khan, who's the faith minister, in September last year, said that 2018 definition, which the Labour Party adopted, was incompatible with the Equality Act. But despite him saying that, and it was leaked that he said it in a letter to, I think, a Sikh organisation, nothing was done further for the Labour Party to suggest that they were backing down. If anything, this new working group, which was set up or announced in February this year, which was said to be lasting 6 months, and now we're sort of over halfway, and we haven't heard anything more about what's going on with it, other than on Monday, I think it was Dominic Cummings who first posted about the fact that the email had been sent to whoever they are consulting to get evidence from, on the same day that the Casey audit came out and the national inquiry announcements were made in Parliament. So that's what is kind of eerie about it, is that and also the added factor is that the people who are involved in this on this working group are many of the same people who were involved in the 2018 APPG, and their attitudes towards Islamophobia as a concept would mean that actually it's very hard to talk about the grooming gangs, because in that report in 2018, it said an example of anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobia is grooming gangs as an issue. And the chair of this new working group, Dominic Grieve, who's an ex-Tory MP, in 2018, he wrote the foreword to the report and praised it. He said he greatly welcomed it, a report which said that talking about the grooming gangs in relation to Islam is Islamophobic and rooted in racism.
Yeah.
So there's this wider issue that we obviously have people, in general, we don't want to be having any definitions made by the state, which makes it harder to criticize a religion. But also, it almost seems like almost contradictory for the government to be moving in this direction. Obviously, maybe we'll be surprised, but I think there is a lot of cause for concern about the attitudes of people who are working in this group. Another person who's on the board of the working group is Baroness Gahir, who in 2013 said that she was very concerned about the coverage of the notion that Pakistani Muslim men were disproportionately involved in grooming gangs, and she said that fueled racism and Islamophobia and gave ammunition to the far right. And she's on this group as well. So these people have these attitudes, and we'll link it in the description, but as John Jenkins wrote a response to Dominic Grieves, because he's been asked to help with this working group, he is of the opinion that this working group has made up their mind before actually getting to a definition. And also, just to say, the Free Speech Union has not been consulted, despite our expertise on freedom of expression and people who have been accused of Islamophobia when expressing their lawful views. So we also, and Tom Scottson from Politics Home asked the government if they could tell him who was being consulted, but they said that that was a matter of privacy, and if they fulfilled his request, that would create a chilling environment and an unsafe environment for ministers discussing these things. And that's something that John Jenkins mentions as well, that in the terms and regulations of the working group, it says that all of the conversations will be kept strictly confidential, which again is very concerning when this is of a massive public importance. For years, we've had this suppression, for example, around the topic of grooming gangs. And now it seems like something else is going on that could continue that suppression, when now more than ever, we need people to be able to speak freely so that we can get to the bottom of serious issues in society. So that's why the FSU are concerned about it. And obviously we haven't been consulted. So
yes, well, it's that. I mean, obviously, lots of people over the years, people like Christopher Hitchens, have been flagging up the kind of fakeness of the Islamophobia idea, and it's been introduced quite cynically in order to protect Islamism. So Islamism as a kind of the more sort of fanatical end of things. And it's so unhelpful to have these rigid definitions. That would apply to anything. I think in some ways you could say the same about the definition of anti-Semitism that people are trying to kind of nail down. They're not directly comparable, but at the same time, you can see as soon as things move, then like with the grooming gang scandal, because say like I don't know, 40 years ago, one of the tropes became established that Muslims are child rapists, for example, and that was just a trope. Then you might be able to say that that's a kind of form of racism. But of course, over time, when you have these kind of real world developments, you can't afford to have this rigid framework being imposed on how we can explore things and understand things, because it's not clear what the Islamic component is, if any, to grooming gangs. Obviously, we know these men are from Pakistani Islamic backgrounds, or a lot of them are. But what the actual Islam bit of that is, if it actually really matters, or whether that's, it's coincidental, it's to do with how they're able to operate, actually in the reality of being within a closed community, who knows? Obviously, what's required as well is some girls who are unprotected and not believed. So that's the other component that's kind of necessary. So there's also, to really understand this kind of thing, you've got to be able to come at it in a very open-minded kind of way. So it's very worrying.
That's what the Casey audit is calling for, that all of these things need to seriously be looked at to try and understand what's going on and how and why it is that these groups are operating in this way. But if we have that's why it seems very contradictory to, on one hand, the state saying that we need to discuss and investigate all of these elements, religion and ethnicity. But on the other hand, we're going to come up with a definition for Islamophobia and not consult free speech experts and involve people who have historically endorsed the idea that to talk about grooming gangs and the disproportionate involvement of Muslim men is Islamophobic. So how can we marry the two? And they seem to have wanted to have kept it on the down low, because this wasn't I think it was Dominic Cummings who leaked it, but now we've got Claire Coutinho, who's a Tory MP, highlighting it. But if those people hadn't highlighted it, this could have just been going on. We still don't, and none of us know who's being consulted.
Yes. I think you can really see this sort of conflict. I mean, it was there in the Conservative Party's happened, as well as now in Labour, between the people who are primarily interested in just trying to desperately keep a lid on things, and they're partly doing that by playing off one group against, chumming up to certain groups, a kind of balkanized politics. And then obviously there's people like Louise Casey, who's always been quite outspoken and a bit of a truth pursuer, really, to be honest. She's been quite an honourable person all the way on lots of different issues, known as a bit of a bulldog on these kinds of things. So it's kind of interesting that those two things can coexist at the same time. Yeah. But ultimately, you can feel the sort of push is towards partly pragmatism of making sure you don't alienate any constituencies, but also this sort of flabbier presumption all the time that you must, no matter what, you must make sure that community relations are never disrupted, even if there are really material disruptions to community relations that are actually going on that you need to talk about. It's this idea that somehow talking about them is going to make it worse. So it's really, I mean, it's a very, very important issue from, obviously, just from a societal point of view, but from a free speech point of view, you can really see how it's also something that's created such a sense of grievance in people. It's the free speech issue in many ways, isn't it, that people want to talk about, and it's so closely related to immigration and all of those other kinds of ways. And you can see where if you don't have openness and open exploration, you do get people just wanting to shout at somebody who they think is a Muslim, or you're a child rapist, look at what Muhammad did, kind of thing. And it just ends up like that, which is just, prejudice. And then regardless of what you want to explore in the doctrine of Islam, but nevertheless, there's a point where it just becomes naked prejudice. And, it's only destructive. And you can really see the effects of that as we've gone down that route. And sometimes, in fact, you see it on social media where somebody with a name that somebody thinks is Muslim, even if they're not a Muslim, and they say anything on this issue, people say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? You're an apologist for this or that. And there's this kind of leaping to simple explanations for things. So, and there's something else that is kind of related to this, which is Nick Timothy's amendment.
So Nick Timothy is the Conservative MP for West Suffolk, and he's tabling an amendment for the Police and Crime Bill so that the section of the Public Order Act that protects freedom of speech extends to protect the entire Public Order Act, as well as adding it to parts of, as well as that section being extended to parts of the Communications Act and the Malicious Communications Act to protect people's free speech, specifically to do with blasphemy laws.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in relation to Hamit Koskin, who was the political asylum seeker from Turkey, or is, and he burnt the Quran outside the Turkish consulate in February this year, and was initially charged with harassing the institution of Islam, and the CPS dropped that charge after. I mean, if it wasn't for public pressure, I don't know whether they would have just changed their mind. But obviously, that is a nonsensical charge, because it again is conflating an idea or a belief system with a person. How you could possibly harass an idea. But what Hamit ended up being prosecuted for was causing harassment, alarm, or distress to the people who saw him burn the Quran, and the evidence they had for him creating or making someone feel harassed, alarmed, or distressed was the fact that when he was doing it, someone came and attacked him with a knife. But the reason he was able to be, or the judge explained, that despite the fact there are protections in the Public Order Act, specifically under Section 29J for freedom of expression, the judge said that that Section 29J does not cover Section 5, which the judge prosecuted Hamit under. Section 5 is about causing harassment, trauma, or distress, whereas Section 3A, the judge said, is covered by Section 29J, and Section 3A is about hatred against a person for their religious beliefs, which really confuses me, and I've tried to get the answer on this, but I'm still not sure. If Section 29J, which says freedom of expression will still be protected, if anything, surely that should cover Section 5 and not Section 3A, if it's going to leave one of them not covered, because Section 3A is about hating people, and that is anti-Muslim hatred, for example, whereas Section 5 is about causing harassment, trauma, and distress, which is a very subjective feeling. Like that's to feel something, that's subjective. Well, obviously the law has to interpret things in the most objective way possible, but at the end of the day, there has to be, and in Hamit's case, the reason why he was prosecuted was because he was attacked. Basically, that was part of the evidence.
Yeah.
If he wasn't attacked, they would have had a much weaker case for prosecuting him under that section. So basically, Nick Timothy's amendment will extend Section 29J of the Public Order Act to Section 5 and the rest of it as well, so that people cannot be prosecuted for blasphemy.
Yes, so it says, I think it's something like, it protects freedom of speech, and that includes ridicule, insult,
abuse. It even says,
which is kind of interesting. I mean, there is an interesting thing that it's another thing to think about obviously beliefs. They always are attached to people. So in some ways they float around in the ether, but then generally speaking, they have to be articulated by a person, whether that's an author or a speaker. So, when you hate somebody for their beliefs, what does that really mean? I thought about it last week after we were talking about Fahrenheit 451 and, burning books, burning people, that kind of association, because obviously that's, as humans, as people who make words and speech, then we profess beliefs that other people can hate. So they can in effect hate us for our ideas, and that's been very clear. When people call you a transphobe, or you're hateful, that's an expression of hate towards you. So, but obviously you can't run society on that basis, that you can't allow that sort of those kind of emotions to run free between people while they're expressing themselves and holding beliefs. So Yeah, well, it's really important, and there was some good threads and articles about that people can explore. We'll put some links to that in there.
Concerningly, in connection to the Islamophobia working group, and the idea that previously at the 2018 APPG, the definition was conflating Islam with race, is that in Parliament a couple of days ago, when there was a debate on the crime and policing bill, both Jess Phillips and obviously Jess Phillips, the safeguarding for women and against violence for women and girls, who's obviously been a massive part of the grooming gang national inquiry story. And so Jess Phillips and Shokat Adam, who's an independent MP for Leicester, a constituency in Leicester, both of them seemed to not be able to grasp the difference between criticising an idea and criticising people on the basis of their race. And Shokat Adam, well, firstly, Jess Phillips asked, well, what about anti-Semitism? And Nick Timothy had to explain that he's literally said, I think the minister has misunderstood what I'm arguing for here. I'm arguing about ideas, not people's race. And then after that explanation, Shokat Adam stood up and said, can I ask the honourable gentleman what he would like me to tell the family of Mohammed Salim, the 80-year-old grandfather who was stabbed simply for being a Muslim? And then Nick Timothy had to explain again, obviously that wasn't all he said. That was obviously an appalling crime. I remember it very well, but I do not think this has to do anything with what I'm saying in this debate. I mean, I thought his responses were excellent. And he just said, he had to explain to this MP, in a free and pluralistic society, we have to be free to criticise ideas. There are laws to protect people, but we cannot have laws that protect ideas from scrutiny or criticism. And the fact that is having to be explained to MPs, I think is quite shocking.
Yeah.
And for Shokat Adam to ask that question as though he thinks that Nick Timothy doesn't care about people being killed, murdered, just on the basis of the fact that they might be a Muslim, it to me is really shocking. Like, I think that's yeah, I mean, to me it really does raise eyebrows. Like, what? How is this being twisted to he's trying to make it suggest that that's what Nick Timothy is in favor of, or in favor of not preventing.
Yes, no, I think that's what a lot of people think. I mean, it's not just people like that MP. I think there is a sense that there's so many bad people, that somehow people that are pro free speech are bad people who are indifferent to suffering. And I think that's partly because the left has sort of so successfully captured or in its own mind, so successfully captured the moral high ground. They really think that anybody that's not up there with them is bad. It's bad and motivated by bad intentions. So that goes back to the grooming gangs thing, where I remember when Anne Cryer, who was a Labour MP, and that was way back in 2003, tried to raise alarm about grooming gangs in Rochdale. And she was absolutely, I mean, just immediately cast out from the kind of Labour tribe. But then obviously way beyond that, she had threats and everything. And it was just terrible for her. But it's that idea that people suspected her motives, that somehow, you people are kind of just waiting to be revealed as the racist that we all are, rather than her dealing with trying to raise something that was a really, really important issue. Yeah, and it's that kind of, it's a weird mixture of, on the one hand, this idea that people have very dark hidden motivations that are disruptive of the kind of otherwise ideal community that we'd all live in, but then the other one is just this idea that even if you don't have these intentions, by raising the issue, you are disrupting community relations or having a negative effect on community relations. And that in itself, it doesn't matter. Then that doesn't matter where the truth is, because the truth can be something that's disruptive, but therefore you mustn't say it. So it's there's multiple ways in which the chilling has happened. Yeah. Well, all important stuff, and that's not going anywhere as an issue, is it? It's going to keep on coming up. So yeah, people should follow the Nick Timothy amendment. I don't know what happens next in Parliament.
I'm not sure either. Yeah. I think it's I think it's at the report stage, or that was the report stage. So it's getting towards the end of its time in the Commons. So the vote will be quite soon, I imagine.
It's got cross-party support, I think, so that's not a bad thing, apart from the Lib Dems. Which Nick Timothy,
the Lib Dems like to pretend these issues don't matter a lot of the time.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thanks, Connie, and goodbye, everybody. And you'll hear from us again next week.